This might be a bit of a controversial video, but I wanted to address the fundamental flaw of CCBS as a system. If you're not familiar with CCBS, it was introduced alongside the Hero Factory line, I believe back in 2011, and it is an interesting system. In fact, it is a system with a lot of potential. However, it sort of goes against the nature of other Bionicle and Lego themes. I don't know why I mentioned Bionicle just yet, but Lego themes in general. The problem that I think I have with CCBS is that it is unlike any other Lego theme, right? Many people will applaud it for being the most Lego-like character building system, at least up until the point of the new SCCBS that has replaced it, but I'd make the argument that it's not so friendly. Here's the thing. You can make a lot of incredible builds out of CCBS, but in my opinion, the flaw is that this is called the creature and character building system, but is not a system designed for building creatures. It's not to say that that's a bad thing. You can absolutely create a system for building characters, but even in that, I think it is flawed for one major reason. Lego has introduced many different types of building systems, right? You have the standard bricks with their studs and anti-studs. You have Technic with their pins and axles. You even have Snap, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong, which still kind of has its own thing going on and clearly was not well received, but at the very least could adapt pins and axles as well. CCBS, however, lacks this in a lot of ways. It's not entirely absent. Many system builds, many CCBS builds still contain those pins and axles, or maybe even the suggestion of a stud. But what I think is the problem is that the smallest piece to come out of CCBS is this bone right here, and arguably the friction extender, but these serve slightly different functions. The problem with this is that this means that you're essentially working in modules of 3. Yes, there are ways around it, but Lego as a system, as a universal system, has sort of a strict modularity to it, right? As much as Lego might not intend for you to do so, you could insert a Lego brick into these two pinholes and it's going to work because those studs and those pinholes are equidistant from each other. Whereas with this new connection, not only are there no anti-studs, no studs to be found here at all, but the connections that are there are lacking in what they can connect with, what they are compatible with. This accepts only a ball joint. This accepts only a socket and nothing else. Sure, you could certainly insert a piece into there, but it's not intended and it's not going to hold in with any amount of friction, right? And so the major issue that I have with this as a system is that it is not just not compatible with, it's actively antagonistic to system wherever possible. What makes this worse is that I think that you can work within this, that you can create maybe adapters and things, but that wasn't really done. Instead, we got a lot of things like these shells here, right? Which are interesting pieces, and they have these new at the time, open bar hole connections, which can be used to connect different types of armor add-ons and even some weapons with this connection. It's a cool idea in theory, but when the problem starts to show itself, it really shows. In 2015, Lego brought back Bionicle, and one way that they chose to differentiate it from the Hero Factory sets that were utilizing this system up until this point was to create more metallic parts, more transparent parts to set these characters apart, which is fine in theory, but in my opinion, it sort of starts to alienate what Bionicle is as an idea, as a story. So when you get a set, let me grab one here real quick, break the flow of this video, like the Tahoe Uniter, which yes, this is a modified version of course, but when you get a set like this, you see that, okay, there's a lot of metallic, there's a lot of transparent colors, but where is the character's identity lie? What of these colors is his true color? Red is what it typically is in the story, and it's fine to change that, but I feel like you start to go in a different direction entirely that sort of starts to alienate what you're trying to do. And so you see pieces like this paired along with pieces like this that are incredibly smooth versus something with so many pistons that it doesn't make sense anymore, right? In several ways, these pistons are just here as detail and nothing else. They don't suggest the movement of anything. So one of the major issues that I have is that it almost feels as though with Bionicle, with CCBS, Lego wanted to sort of have their cake and eat it too, right? In some ways, they wanted to be ambitious, but in some ways, they wanted to be reserved. And I think they were reserved in the worst cases, honestly. I'm going to try and get my words right here. CCBS Star Wars does do something well, in my opinion. Not perfect, but better. It is not afraid to introduce new shells. So when I take a look around one of these bins, which I absolutely placed in the wrong order, can you tell I'm a professional? When you take a look around in one of these bins, you come across pieces designed for Star Wars, which still have those connections. Some of them do, some of them don't. And you'll also come across pieces like this with no external connections. Now, I don't really care for pieces like this, but I can appreciate that the effort was done, right? And it's weird to see that an IP like Star Wars, they weren't as afraid to go out of their way to create something new, whereas with something like Bionicle, they were still fairly reserved. I haven't done a true and total comparison between Bionicle 2016 and, CCBS Star Wars from around that era to see just how many molds were introduced for each one, but it feels as though Lego wasn't fully confident in this system. And so, though many of the pieces that came out for CCBS began to come out around the year 2011, that's also kind of where it stopped, too. And I think that that's baffling to me, because I feel like when you want to develop a system further, you have to keep adding to it, right? Just like Technic, for years, didn't have a 7-length axle, a 9-length axle, an 11-length axle. Eventually, those pieces would be added in as needed. It makes the most sense to have had those at the get-go, but at the very least, we were seeing them still being introduced. This year alone, we've seen brand new pieces introduced to base Technic, not just talking about panels, but actual pieces that retroactively serve purposes we've never seen before. And so it's shocking to know that CCBS was around in Lego for the better part of 7 years, most of a decade. And for a lot of it, most of the new parts that would come out were add-ons. Things that were designed specifically for this system, not to be used elsewhere from Lego, which is one of my major issues with this. Yes, this can be connected to Lego thanks to the fact that it uses bars to connect with, but it oftentimes means the use of extra parts where I don't think it's always necessary. CCBS feels like a disjointed system, and it really shouldn't because of the amount of effort that went into something like it. With that system, we got, one foot mold? Yes, we would get foot molds with the Ben 10 characters as well, and then eventually we would get the Beast foot molds in 2014 with Invasion from Below, arguably my favorite wave from all of CCBS outside of maybe Bionicle itself. 2015 was a very strong year for Bionicle, in my opinion. Not perfect, and it had its issues, but it showed true dedication and an identity that we hadn't seen for a while. But I almost feel as though with CCBS, Lego didn't fully understand what they were trying to do, or rather, maybe what the fans expected from a system like this. It's one of the reasons I don't think that a system like CCBS comes back. That's not to say that it can't, but many of these pieces have likely been retired. The molds are gone. But the other issue I have, as I mentioned and alluded to at the beginning of this video, is the creature portion of character and creature building system. I don't think it's necessary for a system to solely rely on creatures, but it's nice when they do show up. So the fact that so many, in fact, maybe above 90% of everything that was created with CCBS was a bipedal build, showed that this is not truly a creature building system. And that bothers me, because here's the thing. 2016 Bionicle, for as much as it has its flaws, does do one thing right: the introduction of creatures. Now, they're not perfect and they are quite lacking in new parts, in my personal opinion. That's a gripe for another day. But one of the interesting things is that 5 of these 6 creatures utilize the small CCBS torso. And yet, if I can recall correctly, none of them use the upper ball sockets at all. Now, part of that is because these sets have functions, and that's cool. But it's still interesting, isn't it, that these are creatures, several of which are also bipeds, and few of them end up utilizing this body in a way that's intended to build a creature. The Tunneler Beast, kind of the same thing, right? Again, a fantastic build, by the way. But it has to add things onto this torso to build a creature. Part of that being that it has 6 arms, and that makes sense. So I feel like there's sort of an anti-modularity to CCBS that's inherent in its design. And here's the thing. If CCBS had been a system developed by any other company, I think it would have been well received. I think it was well received when Lego did it. But it was sort of the antithesis of what Lego typically strives for. A lot of people made fun of Bionicle for not being real Lego, and that's fair. I don't think that that's an argument that necessarily holds up, but that's fine. But I would argue that CCBS kind of stretches further away, even, because it leans more heavily into this ball and socket system that arguably was controversial at the end of Bionicle's run anyway, but also does so in a way that's inherently limiting. How many armor pieces are designed to only fit one way, even though they are connecting to a ball joint, which in theory has an infinite number of combinations? But several pieces limit these connections on purpose. For example, that friction adder. It's a neat piece and it's very useful, especially retroactively, but you can't really connect something like this shell to this friction adder. And why not? You know, what is the reason for that? So that's just one little gripe for this video. And as I've said, I may make a separate video in the future talking about my issues with Bionicle for 2016, 2015 in general, and where I think maybe it could have gone. But that's not only for another day. I need some growth as well. That's pretty much it for this video, though, guys. If you did enjoy this one, make sure you are subscribed. It really helps the channel out a lot, and it has been helping. You guys have been doing a wonderful job with it. We continue to grow this community, so thank you all very much, and hopefully you're having a wonderful holiday season. With that said, if you want to continue this conversation in the comments, feel free to do so. I'm more than happy to chime in, or if you want to take this over to Discord or Instagram, you can find links for those in the description. Plus, you can also check out my Patreon, and if you want to help the channel get some perks, hey, that'll be in the description for you guys as well. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.